I want to talk today about Operation Spiderweb. This was the operation out of the Ukrainian military, the special operatives in Ukraine, that put 117 drones into either 4 or 5, military airplane installations deep into Russia, and very successfully targeted those drones at weak points in more than 40 aircraft, bombers primarily, and destroyed about $7 billion, about 34% of Russia's aircraft with these drones. And the reason that I want to talk about that is twofold today. One is that that's a game changer in the war of Russia on Ukraine, but also because it's a game changer in war strategies themselves. This is a really big deal. And when I say a really big deal, so you think about the history of warfare, different technologies dramatically change warfare. So, for example, in the American Civil War, which is the war I know best, all of the tactics stopped being operative in that war because the United States began to manufacture in high numbers rifles. And the difference between a rifle and a musket is that a rifle actually has inside the barrel sort of a bead that enables a bullet, an elongated bullet, to spin as it fires. And those longer bullets that could spin as they fired were so much more accurate that it was rather like throwing a fast ball versus a knuckleball. And that meant that rifles became far and artillery became far more accurate than they had ever been before. So it's a real game changer. Similarly, the concept of total war in that war changes the way people think about war. Well, in the case of Operation Spiderweb, the reason it matters in the struggle between Russia and Ukraine is this. First of all, in 1994, with the Budapest Memorandum, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia guaranteed to Ukraine protection of its sovereignty, that they would not invade either economically or invade the Ukraine's sovereignty on the condition that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. It did so, and it was supposed to have this protection of its sovereignty, but Russia broke that in 2014 when it invaded Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. And there's now a bridge to that peninsula called the Kerch Bridge. I'll tell you more about in a second. But so when Russia invaded Crimea, the United States stood behind Ukraine and put sanctions on Russia, started to equip the Ukrainian military, and so on. And that was a bipartisan support for Ukraine after the 2014 invasion. That's one of the reasons that Russia got involved in the 2016 American presidential race, because they wanted those sanctions taken off, and they wanted the incoming American president, if it were Donald Trump, to sort of wink as they tried to take over the 4 eastern oblasts of Ukraine. So the United States has always stood on the side, since then has stood on the side of Ukraine. But Donald Trump changed that when he went into office, pretty dramatically changing it on February 28th, 2025, when he had Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky into the Oval Office, and he and J.D. Vance sort of blindsided him and made it very clear that they were siding with Russia. They kept saying, "You don't have the cards," if you remember that saying. And a lot of people were really horrified that the United States was pretty openly supporting Russia in its attack on Ukraine rather than what we had traditionally done. So in the moment that we're in now, so what happened after that is that Ukraine and European countries began to work together to try and make up the slack that the United States was now, the scope that it was now giving to Russia. But at the same time, Ukraine began to say, okay, to Donald Trump, okay, you want a ceasefire? We're behind a ceasefire. They agreed to a ceasefire. I think it was March 11th. And of course, Vladimir Putin, who is the president of Russia, has simply refused to do that. In fact, he has increased the bombing of Ukraine, both with aerial bombing and with drones, even as he claimed to be talking about a ceasefire with Donald Trump. So Trump has been sort of saying he's frustrated, but at the same time, he's not doing anything to make Russia come to the table to do things like sanctions. Now, interestingly enough, in the Senate, there is a bipartisan move. There are now 80 senators from both parties that are co-sponsoring tighter sanctions or higher sanctions on Russia. But until Donald Trump gets behind it, there's no point to push that forward. So they currently are not. But the reason I just set all that up is that's where things stood until June 1st, when Operation Spiderweb, which is the name of this operation to send these drones into very deep into Russia and to hit military targets as opposed to the civilian targets that the Russians have been hitting in Ukraine. This is a game changer because the United States was not informed that this was happening, and what it did was it illustrated to the Russians that the Ukrainians could bring the war home to them. And you're seeing in a number of places people saying, oh, it's Russia's Pearl Harbor, but it's really not, because America's Pearl Harbor, which was December 7th of 1941, the United States was not involved in World War II when that happened. It got involved. And the timing, I actually did out the months today. It's rather as if America had a Pearl Harbor in January of 1945, when it had already been involved in that war for more than 3 years. So this was a really big sign of Russia's vulnerability. And then today, the Ukrainians hit the Kerch Bridge, not as in such a damaging way, but again, demonstrating that they can hit crucial targets. And those are both very symbolic. The attack on the aircraft was on a Russian military holiday, and Putin always likes to hit things on special days to him. And the Kerch Bridge is something that Putin feels very strongly about. That's sort of one of his babies. So what they were doing for this moment is to say, you might want to get yourselves to the bargaining table, because we got a lot of stuff up our sleeves. All right. So that's why it matters in terms of Russia and Ukraine. But in terms of the war strategy of countries going forward, the drones that the Ukrainians used to hit $7 billion worth of aircraft cost between $600 and $1,000 a piece. Now, you do that math. What this has shown is the extraordinary power of asymmetric warfare. That's when those sides aren't even. And so long as one side is very adaptable, has quick technology, and has really good intelligence. So all of a sudden, all of the countries that have just been pouring their energies into having the most stuff, the most hardware, including the United States, which, the Donald Trump administration wants to put $1 trillion into the U.S. military, much of it into hardware, are looking at the fact that this group of very agile, very secretive, because they didn't let it out for 18 months, operatives managed to destroy almost 35%. And again, we don't know for sure, because you never really know the numbers in warfare, and different sides exaggerate or downplay their numbers and so on and so forth. But they demonstrated that with an extremely small inlay of money and the use of technology and intelligence, they were able to have this major strike against a major military power. And that, all of a sudden, if you're following this at all today, it's been a fascinating day, because all sorts of people who are interested in war strategy are like, we knew this moment was coming, but it's just weird to see it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm calling it out now, is because, again, when you teach the American Civil War, for example, you cannot teach that war without talking about the importance of rifles and of artillery. It changes everything. And, you get these different technological moments that change warfare. And this is one of them. So I just wanted to call it out, because it's a game changer, not only for the geopolitical structure right now between Russia and Ukraine, but also for how countries prepare for war going forward. So I wanted to call that out, just so that people are watching that. I'm not suggesting things are going to happen tomorrow, but those of us who are going to be lucky enough to be watching this for the next generation, and I'm obviously not at my age, they're going to write this in the history books as here's a day that really mattered because it illustrated what you can do with technology and intelligence in the modern world with the capabilities that we now have to have, in this case, piloted drones that operated underneath the air defenses of Russia because they were able to use intelligence, essentially, and to use the civilian population to deliver those drones to right outside the airfields. If you're interested in this, as you can tell, I am. There are now pictures available from the BBC at the very least. There may be more. Those are the ones I was looking at, of the drones that were actually put inside the roofs of wooden structures, cabins that the Ukrainians had delivered by truck drivers to the sites where they needed them, as if they were actually mobile homes. And to me, to my eyes, they look for all the world like bats nestled in the crawl spaces of an attic. I mean, they're literally drones. They look like drones, but they're kind of nestled in there. It's just as a historian, you can tell I'm sort of gobsmacked that to have seen this day, because you don't usually get to watch history change in the news in front of you, and this did. Hey, Danny, Jen snuck in ahead of you from Middletown, Connecticut. Oh, you're in Tokyo? Wow, I don't know how you do this. Urbana and Nancy, you flipped by. Naperville, I grew up in Wheaton. Scottsburg, Indiana. Boy, Indiana's doing interesting things lately, isn't it? Pennsylvania and Maryland and Reading and Portland, Oregon. Okay, so I just got here, and I've been traveling a lot, as you know. I just got here, and I've actually got to be dressed and ready for another event that I need to prep for by 5:30. And I got to walk there. So this is not going to be long today, but there were a few things I really wanted to put on your radar screens. And, if you would like, I am perfectly happy to start doing these more frequently and shorter. I sort of feel like an hour is a long time commitment. Not so much for me, because I'm used to doing this, but for you. And, I could do like 8-minute to 15-minute things here and or on my YouTube channel. And I'm happy to do that because there are a lot of things that need just short explanations. And I'm quite happy to do that. If you think that would be a good thing, please drop a note in the chat and let me know that, or drop me an email. I really don't see the messages that come through Facebook all that much. Anyway, what I really wanted to talk about today were two things, but I'm going to add a third because you've written so many notes to me about it. The third one I'll start with first, and that is what on earth is going on with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is compromised. There's a problem with the Supreme Court, and I could tell you about the history of the Supreme Court. We have had compromised Supreme Courts in the past. We have never had a Supreme Court that did not believe in the Constitution. They interpreted the Constitution to suit their own ends for sure, but in this case now in the United States, it appears that we have a Supreme Court on which 5 members sit who do not believe in the Constitution, that in fact they would like to base us in religion rather than in the Constitution. That's a huge problem, obviously. Now we know, of course, that Justice Clarence Thomas has been really sort of on the payroll of wealthy people like Harlan Crow, who's the one who gave him the RV and took care of bought his property and then let his mother live there and did all the sorts of things that he felt they needed to do in order to keep him on the court because he complained that there was not enough money to be made on the court. That's a real problem when you think about the fact that the Citizens United decision of 2010 and later on the Shelby County versus Holder decision of 2013, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, were both 4-5 decisions, or 5-4 decisions. That is, Justice Thomas's vote really mattered. And of course, we also have Alito there, and now Alito has demonstrated his disrespect for the Constitution of the United States. And then we have the 3 justices that were added by Donald Trump, who has now been found a convicted felon. And the reason that he became a convicted felon was for hiding business records to hide the fact that he had paid to have a sex scandal buried before the 2016 election with the belief that he would not win if in fact that got out. So there's many reasons to think that the 2016 election gave us somebody who not only lost the popular vote but got into the White House in illegal ways. Not to say he wasn't necessarily president. That's a different conversation about the Electoral College, by the way. But there's a lot of hanky-panky going on with those three justices as well. So what can you do? Keep up the pressure for sure on not only Dick Durbin, who is the Illinois senator who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, but also the Republicans like Mitch McConnell who got us into this mess. That being said, no, they're not going to pay any attention to you. You're not going to be able to change their opinions, but you are going to be able to change the opinions of people who are not yet baked in, which is what we're doing going forward. And yes, there has got to be a lot of work done on the Supreme Court, but at least we know now. So I can't give you a magic solution to the Supreme Court except to say keep up pressure, because the thing that the Supreme Court depends upon is that people buy into it, that they say we're going to agree to these decisions. And I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people are beyond the place where we're willing to let 5 compromised people take away our right to bodily autonomy, for example, take away our right to clean water, to clean air, and so on. And the recognition that they have lost that faith is going to matter, if not to them, to the people who are trying to preserve American democracy. Okay, that's all I have to say about that today. But there are 2 other things I want to talk about. The first is that I'm trying in my head to decide which to go with. The first is that I want you to understand, and this is really important, that things are going to get really rocky and mean for the next 5 months. But I want you to understand that Marjorie Taylor Greene would not be melting down the way she is. Donald Trump would not be melting down the way he is. Right-wing talk show people would not be melting down the way they are if they thought they were going to win. Think about it. Think about your lives. Think about your children. Think about the people when you've been in organizations. If you are in control of the situation, you do not have to scream. You do not have to try and manipulate things. When you start yelling and screaming and trying to manipulate things, it means you know you are losing. So I know people are really sort of recoiling from what Marjorie Taylor Greene sounded like in the House Oversight Committee, Special Committee on the Coronavirus. I really would love it if they had shorter titles yesterday. But she, think about when she felt like she was in power with in the House, when she felt like she was really going to be calling the shots. She kind of threw her chest out and she was out there, talking about, running the country and bringing people together and so on. Now that she knows she's on the ropes, she is turning mean and vicious again. And you see this with Trump. You see this with Trump's people. You see it across the board. So as this meanness happens, and it's going to get bad, even worse than it is. Think about, again, a 5th grader throwing a temper tantrum. When they do that, they know it's because they're not in control of themselves or of the situation. And that's a really important thing to remember, because I see so many people, decent people, who just want to take this country back to a place where we can trust our institutions. That doesn't mean we necessarily care if we're Republicans or Democrats. We just want to be able to say, we don't really care who gets elected, because we know we're going to have the Fed operating generally as the Fed does. And yeah, maybe I'm a little bit unhappy with a percentage point of interest, but I can live with that. And, really, we know we need some adjustments in the way that our military works, but basically we're pretty confident we'll be okay. And we all get mad when we get to there's paperwork that doesn't get done for the government, but basically, the government people are there. That's the kind of world that we want to get back to. And there's so many of us, and they see Marjorie Taylor Greene screaming, and they see Trump flailing away the way he is, and they get scared. And they think they're the ones in control. And that's how fascists rise, is they cow the decent people into thinking they've already lost. We have not already lost. To the contrary, the conviction of Donald Trump by 12 ordinary Americans last Thursday was a game changer. And it's a game changer in many ways, but I think what it did is it showed people that ordinary people are still decent people, and we still believe in the facts, and we still believe in the institutions. They're not always right, but the framework is a good framework. And what's interesting to me is, I'm traveling. What's interesting to me is that it feels to me, and this is, as I say, I use that verb very deliberately because it's a feeling about my absorption of media, which is kind of what I do, right? I see what the world is out there, and I always think of myself sort of as a sausage grinder. I see what's out there, and then I see what it looks like, and then I push it back to you all, seeing what it looks like to me. And it feels to me as if a number of largely younger media personalities are pushing back on Trump. They are not in the former traditional bubbles of media. There aren't norms for them, and they're really starting to push things. And if you're interested, the new names that are coming up are important ones. This isn't really new, but Josh Marshall's Talking Points memo has wonderful young political reporters who've been pushing back forever. But we have ProPublica doing these blockbuster stories, including the suggestion anyway that former President Donald Trump has been paying off the witnesses who were supposed to testify against him in the federal cases. And that will be very, very hard to prove, all the lawyers say, because it's not like you write a contract saying, for shutting up, I'm giving you $2 million. But it certainly doesn't look very good. That was a ProPublica story where that broke. You're seeing more and more reports of things that happened with Trump in the past that people didn't feel comfortable talking about and now do, either because their non-disclosure agreements have expired or because they're ignoring those non-disclosure agreements. There increasingly seems to be this crescendo of concern about Trump being in power. And this I find very interesting because there's always been a question in history and in political science of whether Trump's supporters could be translated to someone else. That is, when you have a strong man, will the strong man's people, can they flip to somebody else? And I have always been of the opinion that they couldn't. And that was one of the things that was going to make things hard for somebody like Nikki Haley, or even people who were sort of mini Trumps like Ron DeSantis. He of the white boots. I'm so sorry, I couldn't resist that. Being able to pick up Trump's people. And I think there's something else at play here now. And that I always thought that the reason the MAGAs wouldn't leave Trump behind and go with a less problematic candidate was because they were afraid that the voters wouldn't follow him. But if you've watched, and there's no reason for you to have done this, but I'm not the only person who picked this up, which is what makes me willing to say it. Since the conviction, people like Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene have gotten just supercharged, superheated, super angry, and seemingly super scared. And my guess is that they are very concerned about the roles that they played in 2020 in trying to overturn the election, as more and more of those people higher and higher up the scale are being indicted. Another indictment came down today. And that's going to make them more and more angry and more worried as we're going forward here. And that the more that conviction opened up, said he's not invulnerable. When he came out and he sort of melted down, and then the next day was even worse. I think the tide with regard to Trump has turned so that people are more willing to criticize and more willing to step up and say, well, I didn't like him anyway. And, things like the Colin Cowherd this weekend, I thought that was a wonderful piece he did on, he's a sportscaster, but on how, cut it out, stop lying to me. The world is not nearly as bad as you're making out to be. So that leads me into the other piece that I wanted to make sure I covered. And that's a funny piece for me because it is history in the sense that a lot of what I do is I study psychology to see how people act in the past. I do not have a psychology degree. I have read very heavily, both theoretically and in clinical studies of psychology, not psychiatry, but psychology, to try and understand the different mindsets that people take into historical moments. And something that somebody said this morning really articulated for me, made a leap for me in a way that I had not articulated for myself before. And at the minute I read it, I said, I know what I want to say to people today, even if I'm running down the streets of this city to try and get here. And that's that the piece that I am reacting to was from Jessica Valenti, who writes about abortion. And she was writing about somebody that the Republicans have put forward as a major figure on abortion. And she was pointing out that this person will not admit ever that there is such a thing as a non-viable fetus. She's changed the language of that to make it sound as if there is a chance that a fetus might survive, with the end point of trying to guarantee that nobody will ever get an abortion, even to save their health, even to save, even because a fetus is non-viable, because she is so convinced that abortion should never, ever, ever happen. And all of a sudden it clicked for me. You know, you've heard me say this before, that if you have to lie for a political party or for a political position, there is no validity to your position. That is, you need to be able to base your policies on reality. You need to be honest about what they do. Now politicians always spin. They're never going to say to you, well, it might work, it might not. They're going to say it's going to work and here's why. That's spin. That's a different thing than flat out lying. The way Trump said on Saturday, I never said lock her up. I mean, that was just completely ridiculous. But the way you're seeing nowadays with things like school vouchers, saying all we're doing is giving students choice. Well, we know if you look at the statistics, first of all, lots of rural areas have no private schools. So that doesn't give those students a choice. The money for these voucher programs actually goes to people who are already in private school. So they're essentially a gift of taxpayer money to people who have money. And we also know that because those schools don't have any requirements for who's there, that they are discriminatory schools, often religious schools or racially segregated. And finally, because they don't have to be accredited, their outcomes are worse than those of public schools. So if you want to improve American schools, as we all do, I'm not saying they're bad, but you always want to make things better, right? You need to start with the facts. And the fact that the people pushing the vouchers are simply lying to you and saying, oh, this gives people choice and isn't that great? And anybody who doesn't want to do this is trying to take away your choices for your children. That's just not reality. And I could go on and on and on about this, but the reason that it really clicked for me, and I've always talked about it politically, and said that when a political movement needs to lie to you, as the current day Republicans are doing. And mind you, the Republicans were not always like this. They used to be really into the idea of scientifically based ideas to put into practice. Eisenhower, for example. You know what Eisenhower said was his favorite thing he ever did? Was when he ran Columbia University. And many people were kind of snide about that, like, oh, he's just a general, he doesn't know how to run a university. In fact, he started a very powerful global organization there, but he was a very, very bright man and very well read, very learned, and he recognized that the world needed new solutions to the problems of the nuclear age. And like that was, he was Eisenhower, Republican president, right? That could be the Republicans again. It sure as heck isn't them now. But the fact that they are no longer trying to grapple with reality at all. You know, they're lying that Trump won the 2020 election. They're lying that there's voter fraud. They're lying that they're not going to cut Social Security and Medicare. They're flat out lying. First of all, says that their ideology is hollow. There's nothing there except the attempt to get what they want. And I'm going to explain what that is in just a minute in a very macro sense. So I've always thought about it politically, and I've described it personally, but what really jumped out to me after reading Jessica Valenti's piece this morning was that what they are trying to do, the people who lie to you, and in this case in a political sense, is they're taking away your right of self-determination. And I've said that before, that what they're saying to you is that you can't be trusted with the facts. You have to be lied to. You have to be manipulated into doing what they want you to do. And if you think about it, think about trying to run a business with somebody who, you're trying to make business plans and the person isn't telling you that in fact they've already accepted another job somewhere else, or that they've been skimming out of the till and there isn't any money, or that, they know that they're helping a competitor. You can't make good business decisions unless stuff is on the table. Well, what the Valenti piece did for me today was it said, it's not just about political control, which is the way I've thought about it. But to lie to somebody about something as basic as whether or not their fetus can live. I mean, doctors can say this is a condition incompatible with life, which are tragic, tragic situations. To lie and tell an expectant mother that, in fact, her baby might actually be okay, and to put somebody through that does far more than simply takes away their right to plan a good business. That seems to me to be messing not only with the right of human self-determination, but also absolutely with the right of personhood. Like, not only am I going to steal your right to make good decisions about your business, for example, or good decisions about government, I'm going to steal away your right to make basic decisions about your humanity. And that, to me, was a huge intellectual leap that I wanted to make sure that I called out. Because, again, what always gets me, and you hear me say this all the time, for me, what I do is not about convincing people to vote one way or another. It's about reinforcing the idea of a reality-based world. That I'm going to tell you what the facts are. And sometimes people say, oh, you're always attacking the Republicans, or oh, you're a shill for the Democrats. And I'm like, I am literally telling you what happened today. And often, many people miss this. Often when I tell you what happened, I don't necessarily approve of it. That's a different role for me, and I will advocate that in some roles. But when I'm telling you what happened yesterday, I'm telling you what happened yesterday. I'm not telling you if I approve of it or if I disapprove of it. I'm saying, here's the facts. I trust you as smart human beings, which has nothing to do with education, by the way, to make good decisions if you are provided the right information. And when you have people who are lying to you not only about politics and about the economy, but also about your own bodily integrity, I think we need to call it out. And I think we need really to recognize that the level of dishonesty and lying in the Republican Party is something more than simply politics. It is about a dehumanization of those of us they are lying to. We have no right to political self-determination or to human self-determination in their minds. Now, mind you, I'm sure they don't think about that when they're lying, when they're going in front of the TV cameras and lying. Maybe some of them do. But I promise you what they are thinking is, I need to be in power because I need to put my own ideas into practice. And yet if you deconstruct what that actually means, what it says is that those people I'm lying to are mine to do with as I wish. And that is fundamentally a terrifying idea, but one I think that we can understand if you look at it in the issue that Jessica Valenti brought up, that's somebody literally lying to you about whether your fetus is a viable baby. I mean, that's just, to me, that's like mind-boggling. And I think that maybe humanizes it in a way. Me sitting here saying, well, Ted Cruz is lying to you about the electric grid, maybe doesn't so much. So I really want to call that out today. And I am afraid now, you will love this, I need to shower and change and get ready and get like a mile away from here in the next 45 minutes. You want to take bets to whether or not I can do it? I will try and do one of these that is more, so Beth Voss just asked if I would post the pictures of Trump waving where Nona's there. That is linked in last night's letter, which is on Facebook right below this chat. And I'm afraid I don't remember which one it is, but I know it's there. And I'm afraid I can't remember. And there were a number of them on Twitter yesterday. You might want to just go on Twitter and Google, not Twitter, search for Trump waves to no one or something. It came from a number of different sources, but it is linked in. This is why I link all my notes, is so that you can know that, mind you, I have been misled in the past and exhausted the other night. I switched to organizations I think of as being very similar, but they are not. That's in my head. I do make mistakes, but I trust people enough to say to them, I'm not making shit up. Here it is. And that's actually what this enterprise is all about. So anyway, And somebody, you know what? Somebody else put this in the chat for her. I'm telling you to go look for it. Somebody else just put it in the chat. Some of you know where it is. All right, now I have 2 minutes less to go get ready for this event. So I will try and do these more frequently. If you do want me to do shorter ones and post them both here and on my YouTube channel, I have a YouTube channel. Not that I use it as well as I should, but as of, I'm on the road for another week, and then I'm on the road at the end of the month, and then I'm kind of around for the summer, so I could do a lot there. If you are interested in this, put it in the chat, and I will look at it, and we'll make it work. All right, I will talk to you later. Thank you for being here. People asked me to come on and talk today about the killing of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis today, and I'm happy to do that. As I always tell you, I'm happy to come on if something big happens, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough of the story that I wasn't simply screaming, oh my God, this happened. And so since it happened, I've actually, if you watch me this morning, you will see I'm wearing exactly the same clothes, including the same coat I had on during this morning's broadcast, because I haven't really gotten up since then. Which is not, of course, how any of us expected to spend today. So let me start in on what we know happened, and then I will tell you a little bit about what the larger story is and perhaps what we can do. And I want to be clear, I am incensed. I am furious beyond articulation. So if I seem very flat today, it is because of that fury. All right. So what we know happened today, and I've written everything down so I would get it right, is that at least 7 federal agents this morning at about 9 o'clock local time shot and killed Alex Jeffrey Preddy. He was a 37-year-old man who was an ICU nurse at the local VA hospital. Now, you will note there that I said federal agents. I did not say ICE. It is not clear right now from what agency they came, and it looks, again, remember everything I'm saying is very new. It looks as if he was not an ICE agent, but the shooters were not ICE agents, but were rather from Customs and Border Patrol. And that I've told you about before. That is a division of another agency that has been infamous for its out-of-control violent recklessness. That's the agency that is headed by Gregory Bovino, and it looks as if they're the actual shooters, not ICE. We tend to use ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement as a catch-all for all the federal agents, but let me remind you yet again that the Department of Homeland Security actually has a number of pockets of agents that it can use, and while ICE is the biggest, has the most people in it, the most violent currently appear to be those from Customs and Border Patrol. All right, so as always these days, there was video of the shooting, a number of different angles on the shooting, and it is easy, if you see them, to put together what happened. There are a number of videos, as I say, and one of the earliest ones starts with Preddy on a street in Minneapolis, directing traffic around an area where there are ICE agents. There are not a lot of people there. It's not a huge crowd, but there are definitely people on the street. Oh, and by the way, there are definitely people on the street. I don't recommend that you watch these. These are very, very hard videos. The agents begin to harass a person near Preddy, and I'm not making any assumptions about names or anything at this point because that's still a little, at least to me, not clear. She is the person is pushed to the ground by an ICE agent, and Preddy reaches down to help her back up. As he does that, a federal agent shoots pepper spray into his face. He has a camera in one hand, and with the pepper spray, he lifts up his hand to block the pepper spray. Agents then pull him to the ground from behind him and they begin to hit him, and there are, it looks to be 7 of them. He doesn't really appear to be fighting back. You're seeing people talk about a struggle and so on. To me, it looks like he's trying to keep his head off the ground. He keeps trying to push himself up to keep his head off the ground, which of course is something you would likely want to do if you're being jumped by 7 people. During that struggle, as Preddy is face downward, an agent takes a gun from his waistband, the back of his waistband, or what certainly looks to be a gun and is being identified as a gun. He has not reached for it or anything. His hands are on the ground. Then the agent turns and leaves. He is starting to walk away with his back to the scene when one shot rings out and Preddy stops moving. After that, 9 more shots ring out as agents, and we don't know if one agent fired all 10 shots or if there was more than one agent who fired all 10 shots. At least I don't know that yet. As they continued to fire into what appeared to be his lifeless body. People have compared it to an execution. It certainly looks like an execution. And after the shooting, the agents disperse very quickly. They walk away, and they apparently made no effort to preserve any kind of a crime scene. So that's what we know happened. But let's talk about how to make sense of what has happened since then. Immediately, minutes after this killing, officials from the administration came in front of the TV cameras and called Preddy, said he was engaged in domestic terrorism. They claimed that he was violent, that he had attacked the officers, and made a great deal of noise about the fact that he had a gun. Well, it appears he did have a gun in his waistband, and he was not reaching for it. He also was a registered gun owner with a legal permit for a concealed weapon in the state of Minnesota. So he was not reaching for his gun. You're going to see that all over social media from people trying to justify this. And the gun was not on his person when, at that point, 6 officers are holding him down, and he is shot 10 times. But the administration jumped right to this person is a domestic terrorist or is engaged in domestic terrorism. There's actually a little bit of a difference in the wording there. And you're seeing in a lot of media that the administration is calling people domestic terrorists with a T. I've been very cognizant of the fact that the quotations always say the person is engaged in domestic terrorism, because I suspect of a September 25 memo from the President of the United States, essentially saying that anybody who engages in any activity that seeks to stop him from putting in place his policies is engaged in domestic terrorism. And because there is very specific legal language that defines a domestic terrorist, they're actually going with that vague terrorism. I mean, that's a rabbit hole that maybe you don't care about. But I think it's important because I think what you can see, at least what it looks like to me from being in it, which always makes for a bad vantage point, that they are deliberately expanding definitions of things like terrorism in order to criminalize opposition and to justify the killing of somebody like Alex Preddy or Renee Good or some of the other people who have been shot, but so far have survived. They jump right to the idea that Preddy was engaged in domestic terrorism. But it was very interesting because immediately federal officials refused to let local police officers or a statewide Minnesota agency called the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which specializes in police shootings, they refused to let them have access to the crime scene. When that happened, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went to a judge and got a warrant to get them access to the crime scene. Nonetheless, the federal officials refused to give them access to the site. They have also refused to give out any of the names of any of the ICE, I'm sorry, I keep saying ICE, but that's because it's a catch-all now, the federal agents who were engaged in the shooting. So they have done everything they can to keep people away from an investigation. And there have been other rumors about what they have done that you may have read. So far, I have not seen them corroborated, so I'm not going to repeat those right now. If you have heard other things that the feds did, they may be true, they may not be true. I could not verify them with more than one source, and so I'm not going to tell you what those were. Nonetheless, Minnesota police are siding with the people of Minneapolis and of Minnesota. They are trying to investigate, they're trying to talk to witnesses, they're trying to find videos and so on. And that's the first, I guess the first important thing is that the administration has come out and blamed the victim yet again. They have blamed the victim despite the fact that once again, as in the shooting of Renee Good, there are many videos proving they are lying. This is not negotiable. There are videos from all different angles proving they are lying, just as there were those videos in the killing of Renee Good. But the administration is doubling down on that. They are, and just as recently as a few minutes before I came over here, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, once again accused Preddy of going there to cause mass destruction, to hurt people, and to kill law enforcement officers. And that is a complete fantasy. That is not what happened at all. So that's the first important point here. The second important point is that law enforcement in Minnesota is standing firmly behind the people of Minnesota. Now, I know a lot of people have wondered about police officers, and of course, the Minneapolis police are only one police force and so on. But they have made a big point since the killing of George Floyd in 2020 to have good relationships with the people. They brought in new people. They're trying to have a good relationship with the people of the city, and they have come out and stood with the people of Minneapolis. They're not siding with the feds. They are siding with the people in Minneapolis. That's the second point that matters here. Another interesting point is that in Minnesota, a gun rights organization has come out and expressed extreme concern about this shooting. That's a gun rights organization, which almost always sides with the radical right. They are not doing so. They're not saying this is, we're dead against you, but even them expressing great concern is a knowledge point that is worth having. All right. In addition to the fact that the feds have tried to keep Minneapolis law enforcement and Minnesota law enforcement from investigating what happened, the Department of Homeland Security has also taken over the investigation, despite the fact that immediately after the shooting, it came out with a statement that said that Preddy had approached U.S. Border Patrol officers, that's where I'm getting the Border Patrol thing, with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, that he had violently resisted as officers attempted to disarm him, that the officer fired defensive shots, and said this looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. Pure, straight-up lies. And what they did is that after having said that, they took away the FBI's ability to investigate that shooting, and they say they're the ones who are going to investigate it. You know what that means, right? So here's another point to be made here after this second killing by guns that we know of. I do want to emphasize that the Department of Homeland Security is killing people in the detention camps. And I'm not going to go down that now, but that is important to remember as well. But in addition to or part of that whole takeover of this investigation is that the administration is now openly killing U.S. citizens, and it is lying to us when we know that's what they're doing, because thank God for all those people with their cameras on their phones that are recording, because we have evidence that they are doing it. Nonetheless, they are continuing to do it. And that is a really important demonstration of authoritarianism and even totalitarianism. We know we're lying. You know we're lying. We know you know we're lying, but you have to believe us anyway. They are doubling down on that. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, because there is another thing that matters here. And that's that this is all they have got now. There's nothing they can do to say, oh, well, here's a little bit of murky ground, or, oh, there was a law for this. Or, normally when there is something that is fuzzy, that the American people don't like, there's an escape hatch. You can muddy the waters somehow. There wasn't somebody watching, or there was a law that said we could do that, written in, 1802 or whatever. This is stark. This is all they've got, is to try and force us to believe a lie when our own eyes tell us differently. Why would they do that? And here's where I want to go with what we can take away from this. It is very clear that the person out in front on this issue is Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. A lot of people have been talking about Miller for a long time now. He came to Trump by way of Jeff Sessions. He was on Trump's first attorney general, who had to step down because he had contact with the Russians that he lied about. Miller came to Trump through Sessions, and Miller is an unabashed white nationalist. But there is more than that. That is, Miller is a big fan of a utopian novel from 1973. I'm not going to give you the title of it. I'm sorry, dystopian, not utopian novel from 1973 that posits that Western civilization, and by that they mean white people, although usually white Christian people and usually white Protestant people. There's some wiggle room on that because, of course, we know that Miller is Jewish. At least his family was Jewish. Posits that civilization of it, the book was written about Europe. Miller, of course, is in the United States, is being invaded and taken over by people of color who are going to destroy it. That those people who believe in this are literally at war with invaders coming in from countries where people are people of color. This is, of course, a pure dystopian fantasy. It is racist beyond belief, but in the scheme of American history, it is more than that. That is this fantasy that somehow there are these hordes of people coming, and those of us who adhere to the principles of democracy in the United States of America that say that we are a nation of immigrants, that this is what has made us great, what the economists say and what the politicians say and what people like me say because we understand American history, that we even if we are white, are aiding and abetting those hordes coming in. If we are defending the rule of law, if we're defending due process for immigrants, that we too are the enemies. This argument should not be seen in isolation, either from its racist roots, but also from its sort of application over arguments that Americans made beginning really in the 1980s about the fears of communism taking over the United States with the conniving of people who were already in the United States. And you see that all the way back to the 1950s with Joseph McCarthy, but you really see it in the 1980s with movies like 1984's the one in Colorado, it's not Top Gun, which is what comes immediately after that, Red Dawn. With like Red Dawn, where the whole idea is communists are taking over America with the conniving of politicians in the United States. That idea that people of color are destroying the United States with the conniving of politicians and people like me in the United States, or people who believe in democracy, are they fit right over each other. And that then suggests that people like Miller, people who believe in this idea of being replaced by people from elsewhere, who believe that somehow their civilization is not being honored and supported by immigrants the way that reality has actually played out, but is actually under siege by what almost seems like a zombie army. That then means that any violence directed at people who are not on their team can be justified. And that's really important, because that's not politics. That's not business as usual. That are the fever dreams of a disordered mind. And that seems to be what is driving this army of federal agents into our streets to kill people who are exercising the rights that have been given to all of us throughout American history in the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to protest, the right of a free press. You know, those rights, the rights from the Fourth Amendment, that you are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures of your home, for example, something this administration has thrown out. The 14th Amendment's protection of due process, the idea that they can't simply throw you on a plane and say, we've decided that you're a member of a gang, which now we know the U.S. intelligence did not believe was accurate, and ship you to a prison where you're going to get tortured. Those are our birthrights as Americans, whether you came here and got your citizenship a minute and a half ago, or whether your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, all the way back to before the Pilgrims stepped off a fishing boat in the late 1500s. That is what they are trying to get rid of. On the other side of that are those of us who believe in our democracy and who believe in our rights and who believe in our communities. And that's what happened today on the streets of Minneapolis, is that a man who was an ICU nurse, who was trying to help somebody up, got sprayed in the face with pepper spray, and then got shot 10 times on the sidewalk. How is this going to play out going forward? This is a moment. This is the moment at which it becomes too late for people to say after this, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. It's out there now, between the shooting of Renee Good, and I'm just going to throw in here the kidnapping of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, but I'm not going to talk about that today. But the shooting of Alex Preddy as well. It is no longer possible for people to say, oh, I believe in law and order, and so I support Donald Trump. This is the moment when people have to say, regardless of party, either I believe in democracy, I believe in our Constitution, I believe in the rights that the framers wrote into that Constitution, or they have to say, no, I am siding with the likes of Stephen Miller and believing that my existence is under siege by immigrants. And anything it takes to stop that, regardless of the Constitution, regardless of American citizenship, regardless of rights, has to happen. In the wake of this moment of choosing, politically, it seems to me there are important levers moving and that people like me anyway can push. One of them is that immediately Democrats are, of course, outraged, but they have also come out and said, there's no way we are going to fund DHS until ICE is reformed. That's fine, because this thing is coming up next week, but the funding bill is coming up next week. But remember that in what they call their One Big Beautiful Bill Act of last July, the Republicans gave a huge sum of money to the Department of Homeland Security, and part of that is a huge pot of money for ICE and Border Patrol. That money's still out there. Defunding Homeland Security tomorrow doesn't matter as long as that money is sitting out there. So you're going to hear a lot about that then, and them saying we're not going to go forward with this. That's great. I mean, that's the position, the only position the Democrats can take. But don't think that's going to change anything tomorrow, because I believe the pot of money they're sitting on, I believe, is $1.7 billion. Of course, a lot of it's spent now, but I'm not going to go down that funding thing. Although if you're interested, I have talked about it in the past. That's one thing. But here's the other, and this is the reason that I am so angry. You've heard me say this a lot. The Republicans could stop this tonight if they wanted to. Elected Republicans could stop this tonight if they wanted to. And here's the thing. You know how many Republicans that would take? 16 Republicans. 16 Republicans voting with the Democrats. This is a country of 340 million people. 16 people could stop this. And you could actually impeach and remove Trump with 23. 23 people could stop this if they wanted to. And here's why they might want to. Even if they don't care about what's happening in the streets, even if they quite like Trump or anything like that, the reason they might want to is that Trump is underwater on every issue across the country, but he's also underwater in his approval rating is negative in 40 states. 10 of those states are states that voted for him in 2024. And I'm getting my numbers here from G. Elliott Morris at Strength in Numbers. What that means is if Republicans are hoping to get reelected in 2026 and 2028 and not see the absolute decimation of their party, now is the time for them to push back. And that's a place where we have leverage. Calling your members of Congress, your Republican members of Congress, and saying, if you ever want to see us vote Republican again, you must stop ICE. You must get rid of Stephen Miller. And frankly, I think Trump's on his way out. So I worry less about that, but go for that one if you want. Although I think that one's going to be harder to do because a lot of people like to pledge their loyalty to Trump, but they actually don't like Stephen Miller at all. This is the time to really ratchet up the pressure on Republicans, because that's the only piece of this equation that can do anything right now. You can scream at Democrats all you want, but they don't have the votes. There aren't enough of them. Enough Republicans say it's time we stop this, because this can't go on for another 3 years. And retain American democracy. We're going to lose it. Now is the time for Republicans to understand that they must choose between American democracy and a regime that is destroying it. It is worth noting that in the demands that Attorney General Pam Bondi has given to Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, is a demand that he hand over the voting lists of voters in Minnesota, and he is refusing to do so. It seems pretty clear Trump is trying to rig the 2026 election, determined to stay in power, because these thugs all know now that if the Trump administration loses power, they are going to face the law. And none of them want to do that. So this is going to get worse before it gets better. But rather than simply tearing your hair out and crying, both of which are legitimate responses to what's going on in America right now, if you are interested in increasing pressure to make this end, the place to put that pressure now is on elected Republicans to say, you could stop this, and you are not. You are choosing not to, because we have made it, I've been trying to hold that door open for a very long time for them to say, it's time. You could say something, it's time. Trump's goons are murdering American citizens who are exercising their constitutional rights in the streets. And the time to stop that was back in 2015, as far as I'm concerned, but it cannot continue. The thing to remember going forward in all of this is that what people like Stephen Miller and the goons in the street, and Trump to the degree there's anything left between his ears, what they are declaring war on is us, is American communities, is, people digging each other out of the snow, people bringing food to each other. The very communities that have always made America great. The communities that are bolstered by things like the Bill of Rights, the fact we can talk to each other without fear of the government coming down, and that we can gather however we wish, so long as we're doing it peaceably, and that, we're protected from having somebody battering down our door and saying, we're going to plant something in your house so that we can send you to jail, the way they do in places like Russia, and the fact that we can demand that we have the right to have a trial, and that we can't have the government just throw us into jail because it doesn't like us, which is what happens in countries that do not have those protections. And one of the things that I think Republican senators have believed anyway, because I've seen this referred to in speeches in the Senate, is they keep thinking that it's the courts that are the last line of defense for American democracy. And as I always say, by the time the framers got around to writing about the courts in the third article of the Constitution, they were kind of like, let's go have lunch. Let's just have some courts. They're really specific about Congress. They're really specific about the executive. They're not specific about the courts. Because who's the last defense of American democracy? It's the people. It's the people who are protected by the Bill of Rights, and who recognize that we have those rights and that we must come together to defend them. It's the people who have to make our voices known now, because the courts are going to get around to it. They are, they've been deciding against Trump, right and left, but it takes time. The American people demanding an end to this is what is finally going to end it. And I want to be very clear when I say that, I mean peaceably. I mean peaceably. There is nothing that kills a movement faster than violence. We know that throughout our history, especially in America. I can't speak for other countries, but this is the time peaceably to push back, not just on the Trump administration, but the people in it, like Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski and Stephen Miller and all the people who have defined those of us who oppose them as participating in domestic terrorism when we're just speaking our minds. But also to remind the Republicans in office that this is make or break time for them. They can side with the American people. They can side with our communities. They can side with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They can side with, Teddy Roosevelt and Fannie Lou Hamer and Sitting Bull and Abraham Lincoln and, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, or they can side with Stephen Miller, the neo-Nazis, the KKK, and those people who are trying to turn this country into a fascist state. Now is the time for choosing. I thank you all for being here and for choosing each other in this moment. And all I can say is we have the numbers, we have the principles, we have humanity, and the ultimate goals of self-determination that democracy is designed to put into place. And some of us, as we are doing this, are making the ultimate sacrifice. I suspect when he woke up this morning, Alex Preddy didn't expect that he was going to become written into the history books. And I bet he would prefer not to have been. But those of us who are still here can continue to carry that torch forward.